A 25-year-old gay man who has been in a consensual sexual relationship with his father for 12 years. I successfully seduced my heterosexual single father into entering into an ongoing sexual relationship with me, his gay son, through relentless begging, crying, and persistence. I was gay for as long as I can remember, well before anything started with my dad. My dad has always identified as heterosexual. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I was raised by a single father. He never remarried and never even dated. Around the age of 12, I discovered the nifty erotic story archive and found myself especially fixated on the incest stories. I had no real attraction to my dad prior to reading these stories, and didn't initially feel an attraction to him when I first started reading them. It was more the idea of this phantom father, not my own father, that most interested me. It wasn't until I had been reading them for several months when I started taking more notice of my own father, and began to appreciate him as a man more than as a dad. One story in particular became my favorite. It involved a boy building up the courage to investigate his father's nethers while he slept on a semi-regular basis for many years, without his father ever waking up or learning what was going on. I printed this particular story out and hid it in my bedroom closet, and I would often read it when I masturbated. Long story short, after several failed attempts to sneak a peek, one night I eventually did get him free of his jeans. Just enough to pull him out over the top without having to actually remove his jeans. I should have been satisfied that I got to see it without him waking up, but being an especially horny pubescent 13-year-old who had never done anything sexual before, my curiosity overtook my self-preservation instincts and I put it in my mouth. He woke up almost immediately, and went into the worst rage I've ever seen him in. He stood there facing the wall, breathing really heavily, and told me to go to bed without even turning around. I ran into my room, where I slept in my own bed, alone, for the first time in my whole life. The next morning was a school day for me, but not a work day for him. I went to school without us talking about it or anything else. He basically ignored me and I didn't push it. When I came home from school I found out that he had rummaged through my room looking for my journal to, I assume, try and get inside of my head. He found the nifty story I had printed instead. When I came home it was sitting on our dining room table, and my dad was sitting in the quiet living room in his chair, just staring at the ceiling. He confronted me and asked if I was gay. He stressed that he was upset not because I might be gay, but because I was making the moves on my father. He suggested I should go into therapy, which caused me to have an emotional sobbing meltdown. He consoled me and promised me I wouldn't have to go to therapy and that everything would be okay if I just let go of all those thoughts. Once the conversation ended, the rest of the day went as normally as a day can go after something like that. I presumed that sharing a bed wasn't going to happen anymore, and so I went into my own room. I was more overwhelmed of my irrational fear of sleeping alone in my room, and against my better judgment I went into my dad's bedroom and crawled onto my usual side of the bed. He lifted up off of his pillow when I touched the bed to look at me, and then just laid back down, which I took as the all clear and got into bed. After laying there for a bit he eventually rolled over onto his side, put his arm around me, and told me he loved me. It felt very usual to the way things were before all of this, and I assumed that's what it meant, and told him I loved him too. And then I felt him starting to get an erection, and he started to rub my thigh. I rolled over to face him, buried my face in his chest, and we fell asleep. Nothing happened that night. This continued for months, with each night the two of us clearly shifting from less of a familiar bonding / holding into a bit more of less defined bonding. Eventually he got the second noticeable erection. At this point we'd gotten to close and nothing had come of the fight we had, so I guess I had the guts to reach around and grab it. He pulled back but didn't say anything, and so I reached back to find it again. He let me rub at it through his jeans a little bit, before mustering out a please don't, and moving my hand off of it. I rolled over to face him and hugged him / buried myself in his chest like I had many nights at that point, and more or less begged him. He got louder and things got more and more tense as I kept pleading with him while he kept pushing me away. At that point I shut him up and basically negotiated with him. I asked him to just let me see what it was like, for him to just see what it was like, and if it was too weird I'd stop and go back to sleeping in my room and never try anything again. He protested for quite some time, but I guess I wore him down and finally he asked, in a very unapproving tone, if I would drop all of this once and for all if he humored me. I agreed, and that's when I gave my dad my first blowjob. It took him, what felt like, very well may have been, a very long time to stay hard. I didn't really blow him. I was both small and inexperienced, so I more or less just played with the tip. I was a nervous wreck, too much to enjoy it at all really, because the whole time I was waiting for the inevitable nope, not working, go to your room. The first words we exchanged were me asking am I doing okay? Followed by his hurried don't talk. I tried for quite a bit longer after that, and he didn't come and eventually started to soften again. At that point he told me to stop and go to sleep, and got out of bed and pulled his pants up. I sniffled a bit I think, and though this was the nope I was expecting, but he noticed and reassured me with you're fine before going to the bathroom. After a quick pee he came back to bed, where at this point I was still crying, and he wrapped his arms around me and told me it wasn't what I was expecting and maybe we can try again. Maybe, does that make you feel better? Now go to sleep. We did try again, little by little, sometimes weeks in between. I would wear him down and we'd try again. Eventually it was every night, with the usual routine being me blowing him as long as I could and eventually him finishing himself off. I got progressively better at it until I could finish him off myself. Things obviously escalated beyond blowjobs over the years. He never did go down on me to this day. It's always been very one-sided. I was 17 when we first had full-on penetration sex. We've had sex regularly ever since. I still live at home. I can't imagine not living with him. I don't love him like a boyfriend. I still love him like a father and still view him as my dad. I just view our physical relationship as a way of expressing my otherwise platonic love for him and making my dad happy and feel good while also making myself feel good. We've had long talks about it over the years. Many times he's tried to end it but failed. At this point, 12 years into it, I'm still not sure what he really thinks of all this. He more or less explains it as, "You wanted to make me happy, I wanted you to be happy, and you eventually wore down my resistance." He still has a lot of guilt over it. He won't sit next to me at family gatherings or when we visit my grandparents, unless he is forced to. Being a touchy-feely family, if we are sitting next to each other I'll often rub his back or lean into him, both of which make him uncomfortable and often leads to us leaving early. He often tries to fix me up with people so that I can find someone to really be with. He uses age as an excuse, saying he'll die way before I do and he doesn't want me to be alone. I've only ever told one person, my best friend, back when we were both 16 years old, and it was never brought up again. We're still best friends, and we still have never addressed it. Disney's magic cured sadness. I have one moment that stands out above all the rest. It's the reason I left a good job as a VIP tour guide and moved to the character department. I was working City Hall one day when two guests came in with two little girls. One was in a wheelchair, and the other one looked like she had just seen death. Both were cut and bruised, and the one in the wheelchair had her arm in a cast. The two women were actually nurses from a hospital and were asking for a refund on the girls' tickets, something we avoided doing at all costs. When I asked why they told me the story, the two girls were with their mom and dad at Epcot, and on the way home, they got into a horrible car accident. The mother was beheaded right in front of them. The father eventually died too, but the two girls didn't know that yet. They were from overseas and had no money and no contact information for anyone they knew. They were bringing the tickets back to get the girls some much needed money to help get them back home. My heart absolutely sank. If you had seen these girls, you'd know why. They were truly traumatized. I refunded their tickets and got permission to be their private tour guide for the rest of the day. I walked them to the VIP viewing area for the parade, which was as far as I could walk them in the costume we used to wear at City Hall. I had to leave them there while I put on my VIP costume. On the way down I pulled out every kid joke I could think of. I was a really good tour guide, and I knew how to make kids smile. Nothing worked. These girls were too far gone for that. I left them at the bridge to go change, walked backstage, and bawled my eyes out. I just had never seen something so horrible. I was truly affected, and it was a terrible feeling of powerlessness not being able to fix the situation. When I came back, I brought them to get ice cream, and take them on rides and stuff, but they never smiled, not once. The nurses were loving it and were trying to get them into it, but it just wasn't working. We went back to the bridge to watch the parade. It was there that I honestly saw true magic. The real magic, not bullshit. I had called the parade department to let them know what was going on and set up a private meet and greet after the parade. As the parade was coming around Liberty Square, I told the girls that I had called Mickey and told them all about them. I told them that Mickey asked to meet them after the parade. The little girl in the wheelchair smiled. "Really?" she asked. My heart skipped. "Yes, really. He told me to tell you to look out for him in the parade and to follow the float back to City Hall." The other girl smiled. "You mean right now?" she asked. It had worked. They were talking, not laughing, but talking. It was the first time I had heard them speak. Every single parade performer came up to them on the bridge and told them to look out for Mickey. Every one of them told them that. When Mickey's float came up, Mickey, who was attached to the float, managed to turn her body sideways, look down at the girls, and point towards Main Street. That was all it took. The girls were excited now. They had forgotten about death. They were lost in a magical world, and I couldn't believe I was watching it unfold in front of my eyes. We followed that float all the way back to City Hall, singing Mickey Mania the whole way. Back then, City Hall used to have a VIP lounge behind the desk that was for privacy during difficult situations or to host celebrities. I took them in and showed them the book where all of the autographs were. They were eating it up. The girl who was Mickey that day got down off her float and, without even taking her head off, walked up to me backstage and said, "Let's go." I walked in with Mickey behind me, so I got to see the exact moment the girls met their new friend. They got shy, but Mickey was in control now. Those girls met the real Mickey Mouse that day. Every single parade character stayed dressed to meet those girls. One by one, they'd come in and play a bit, then leave. We were in that lounge for over an hour. Mickey stayed in full costume the entire time in the extremely hot weather. When Mickey finally said goodbye, I had two excited girls on my hands that couldn't stop smiling. They talked and talked and talked. We had a wonderful day after that, but what I remember most is when we walked by the rose garden, the older one said, "Oh, my mommy loves roses. I mean..." And she stopped. I held out my hand and walked her to the gate, picked her up and put her on the other side, and said, "Pick one." She looked happy as she picked out her favorite rose. She didn't say anything more, and she didn't need to. I said goodbye to the wonderful nurses and the wonderful girls, then walked backstage behind the train station. This time I didn't cry. It felt so good to be a part of that. I realized that as much as I liked helping guests at City Hall, the true magic of Disney was in the character department. I auditioned, transferred, and never looked back. I have been Goofy for over 20 years now. Journal of Jimmy C. the Demon. My name in the journal is Reese. Notes on what happened at Tybee Island, Georgia, on the first Tuesday in December 2005. Drove there during the day, and the sunshine was getting me down. Kept thinking about how earlier I had gone to Reese's house after waking up there, and he woke up early, took a shower, came back and woke me up, acted very sweet. Then I went home, took a shower, Came back to go with him to Tybee, and he'd gotten drunk already and was teasing me, being sort of an ass. I even threatened to go home once, but I stayed, feeling that I really should go to Tybee with him. But I was excited to show Tybee to Will during the day since I knew it well and he'd never seen it. He talked about how it all reminded him of his childhood as we drove through the salt marshes and over bridges, the sun, the palm trees. I'd grown up in fog, got to Tybee and he wanted to get a couple of beers even though we had rum in the trunk, well really the back of the van. The first bar we went to carded Rees, and so we left, remarking that everyone in the place had given us strange looks as soon as we walked in. Went over to Fanny's a couple of doors down, all in the area of the beach by the pier. I decided I didn't want a beer after all and told the woman I'd just like a glass of water. Rees had a beer, only cost $1. Noticed the white Volkswagen Beetle parked outside when I came in, but did not see Jimmy enter. Rees pointed out a man sitting one stool down from me drumming his fingers strangely on the stainless steel bar, more like dancing with his nails, stretching his long fingers. Thought immediately that he was gay. Rees and I watched and talked in whispers about it for a few minutes before he, the stranger, spoke. He first talked about how I had noticed him dancing with his nails, then looked at his nails, surprised, and said they look like shit. I laughed, getting a weird feeling about the guy. He then spoke about how it's important to notice details and he likes it when people pay attention, that he pays attention to everything, that he knows that I do too. His eyes are blue and gray, he has blonde hair and a narrow pointed nose above pale lips that cover crooked teeth, not very white, almost like fangs. His teeth are all I can look at until I look him in the eye, something I normally won't do until I know a person at least a little, and he seems to evade me. He asks if I love Rees. Without hesitation, I nod and say yes. He asks Rees, do you love her? And he looks uncomfortable, laughs a little bit, says, yeah, I guess so. Then the guy says that I am beautiful, and that if Rees doesn't love me, unconditionally, as I do him, someone else will. He touches my hair and says that I am a creature of God. He then tells us that he walked 3 miles up and down the beach and it sucked. Said some things about God's green earth, told a story about a scorpion that asked a frog for a ride across a river, who then stung the frog, told the frog it was in his nature, and then they both enjoyed their last minutes of life because they both would then die. He told Rees he knew him and kept trying to get to him through me. He'd say I'm not hitting on you girl, but continually told me I was beautiful. He tried to piss Rees off, kept saying that he knew him, said he is in his room at night, he's what crawls on Rees' back, told Rees his glasses were cheap, that my glasses were perfect because I see through them rather than hide behind them. Then he said that I was perfection, that I was one step away from becoming myself. Earlier he talked about fashion, thought my glasses might be Armani, said Prada was his favorite person. When I noticed that his orange leather jacket had a red rectangle of fabric on the left breast that said Prada. He said to Rees that he knew who he was, to which Rees replied that he knew who he was. The stranger left to go to his car to get money for more drinks. He'd offered to buy us all a shot of tequila and already bought Rees a beer. As he walked out he pointed to the license plate. His car was the white Beetle outside. The license plate read Fierce. While he was gone, Rees asked me if I knew who the man was. I nodded, saying I had an idea. Yeah, but you think you're crazy every time you think it, don't you? I was thinking the man was the devil or something close. Then I wrote that I missed some things. Here they are. When asked where he was from, he didn't ASN our. We thought he could have been from Tybee, but he said he didn't live there. Asked him where he lived and he just started talking about his other car, a Mercedes-Benz with a plate that said Utopia. Asked if he lived in his car, he said no, Utopia's doors are closed to me. Rees asked him where he learned all he was talking about. He'd said he could speak 5 languages, English being the most important because it is trained and often spoke a few sentences in a language I could not recognize. And he said he lived in San Francisco, where he jumped off a bridge and died. This is the point where I told her to leave. That's when he said he would have drowned me in the ocean, started referring to himself as we and finally told me that the next time I would see him it would be in that black Mercedes. When I read what she had written, literally that day, I knew that I wasn't imagining the details wrong. That this actually happened. This is probably the single most frustrating and scary thing that has ever happened to me. I want to imagine it's just a normal crazy guy, but unless you saw it and felt it and heard him talk about all the little details of what you were supposed to do that day when only you knew it, you just can't understand the impact of it. It's been 10 years, and my only solace really is that my ex-girlfriend was there to corroborate. That communication, where I reached out to her, actually caused us to be on good terms again after a decade. It seems to have been something that bothered her just as much as it bothered me. And still, to this day, even though I'm living 10,000 miles away in Southeast Asia, I can't stop looking for that car. I can't stop thinking about Jimmy C's twisted face. I wonder if he still crawls on my back, and if the fear I feel at night, often to where I must drink myself to sleep or find a one-night stand just so I don't feel alone, is him, or them, watching me. Met a demon named Jimmy C. At the bar, I met a man once who knew everything about me and said he'd jumped off the San Francisco Bridge many years ago. This has haunted me for a long time. I was about 19 at the time, and I was living in Savannah, GA. I drank a lot. I worked this terrible job as a grunt laborer, the kind where you go to those temp labor agencies like Able Body and Labor Finders. I'd show up at 4 a.m., work until 5 p.m., and drink myself to sleep after only taking home maybe $60 for the day. I was supposed to go into work this particular morning, but I decided to skip. I called a girlfriend and tell her I want to go to the beach Tybee. I had already started drinking. She comes over, we hop in my big, ugly van, pack up some rods, and head to the beach. I decided to have a drink across from the beach at this little bar. This is where the story gets interesting. Shortly after ordering my drink, I get this really weird feeling. I became hyper aware of my surroundings. The door opens, and I see this guy walk in out of my peripheral vision. There was a seat between me and my girlfriend, but the bar was empty at like 9 a.m. and he could have sat anywhere else, yet he chooses to sit right between her and I. Then he starts doing this thing with his fingers. The bar top was reflective, and he takes his fingers like two little legs, and starts walking with them, skating with them on the top of the counter. This isn't something out of the ordinary, but I took notice because when I was in school, I did that all the time. I pretended I had rollerblades on my fingers and that I was skating around my desk. I hated school and was always distracting myself, so I became kind of mesmerizing for some reason. That's when he looks at me, and in this really think kind of Germanic or Nordic accent he says, "I notice you're a man who pays attention to detail." I'm also a man who pays attention to detail. Now, before I continue, I have to describe this guy. He had this short, spiky hair that was bleached at the tips, kind of like a late 90s style. He had really expensive clothes on, like a nice Prada leather jacket, nice designer jeans, really nice boots. He seemed like a kind of gay guy with awesome fashion sense and really distinctive taste. I always remember this, because I think to myself, some weird homeless crazy guy couldn't have afforded those clothes. Anyway, the other thing that stuck out was his eyes. They were piercing gray. It reminded me of like a husky's eyes, but his pupils just stayed this disturbing pinpoint size. They were just extremely small, which caused his look to be kind of terrifying. His teeth were normal, right? But not at the same time. I don't know how to explain it. They were sharper than they should be, as if they were filed slightly. His hands were normal, but his fingernails were slightly long and pointed, as if he deliberately did it. He kept licking his teeth, too, as if he were salivating. The thing about this guy is that, you look at him, and everything seems normal, but off at the same time, so you're questioning if you're crazy for thinking this. This guy then begins to start talking about the relationship between me and my girlfriend, but really strangely, he's talking about how beautiful she is and how I should pay more attention to her. Shortly after he began talking like this, I had this almost knowing feeling come over me. I knew this guy was not a human. I look at my girlfriend and say, "You need to leave." She just kind of looks at me like she knows too. Without a word of protest, she gets up quietly and leaves. Later I learned that she went next door to get a coffee. That's when this guy literally says to me with the utmost confidence, "You were supposed to go fishing today." He points at the beach across the street. "If you had, I would have drowned you in that ocean. And I shit you not," he fucking hissed. Again, for some reason this overwhelming calm had come over me. I just ask, "Who are you?" He answers back with this crazy gutter language, like act back, but it was really long. It sounded Arabic or Hebrew or something. I just, for some reason without skipping a beat, and I have no idea why I was so calm to this day, say it in a way that I can understand. He says, "You can call me Jimmy C. I jumped off the San Francisco Bridge years ago, and we've been watching you." From there on out, he never referred to himself as me or I but only we. The conversation became something very strange after this. He was saying things like, "We see you taking a bath, we wish we too could feel the warmth of the water and the comfort of the steam," and other stuff. He kept buying me drinks, too, specifically whiskey sours. It was like he had an endless supply of money. He smoked Marlboro ultra-light cigarettes. After I don't know how long, because I lost sense of time I told him I'm going to leave. I walk next door, I get my girlfriend, and she's stone silent. We start driving home, don't say a word. Then I just ask, "Do you know what that was?" And she just says that was a demon. This girl had parents that were scientists, she was really analytical, completely non-religious, and that was the first thing she said out of her mouth. Now, I didn't say this part before, because this is the most important aspect of the story, so I'll say it now, because it's what happened after this that screwed me up for fucking years. The last thing this Jimmy C guy said to me before I left, is this: "Look at my car." I look outside, I see one of those newer Volkswagen Beetles. It was white. What does the license plate say? I look at the plate and it literally says, "Fierce." He looks me dead in the eyes and says, "The next time you see me, I'll be driving a black Mercedes and the license plate will say Utopia." Stupid, right? That night I was still calm. I don't know why. I felt like that guy on Office Space after his hypnotherapist died right in front of him and he was weirdly zen. But my girlfriend started having terrible nightmares of this guy's head just staring at her in her dreams. Weeks went by, and that's when the encounter started affecting me. I found myself becoming paranoid about that black fucking Mercedes. Every black car I saw, I checked if it was a Mercedes. If it was, I immediately looked at the license plate. I started doing it when I watched TV or movies as well. I couldn't stop. Now, I'm going to fast forward a bit. About 10 years go by. I'm 29 and, in silence, when I'm alone, when I'm drinking, I often think about this encounter. I still look at black Mercedes every time they pass, but I'm not so much anxious about it anymore, as curious. And, I remember that my girlfriend at the time always kept a journal. By now I'm pretty sure that I'm insane. Maybe I was drunk, maybe I'm not remembering any of this correctly. After years of trying to find news articles of a Jimmy C. that committed self-mutilation on the San Francisco Bridge, looking at black cars, and so on, I feel like I'd grown out of it. Yet, still, I had to know. So, last year I tracked down my ex-girlfriend. We ended on bad terms. I find out she's a school teacher in Wisconsin, has married a woman, and is actually trying to have a child. I figure she's not going to talk to me, but I send her a Facebook message anyway. I ask her if she can find the journal from that day, because I have to know if her events line up with mine. Sure enough, she had it, and it contained even more detail than what I remembered because she had literally written it at the coffee shop next door right after it happened. I'll share her journal if everyone is interested. My job killed my relationships and my life. In my field it is hard to find anyone who hasn't had a divorce. I was blinded by the income partly because I could provide very well for the woman that I loved and with whom I was sharing my life. In the end I lost the only reason I went through all that bullshit. However, now that I am divorced and alone there is no real reason to stop. I do have a very nice career and a very comfortable existence. I paid far too much for it, but I did pay for it and it's mine along with all the toys and comforts I coveted and worked so hard for. I realized far too late how self-centered I am. I worked far too hard and neglected my relationships because I liked to feel that I was providing for my wife. It made me feel good even after my wife had more than enough and only wanted to be with the man she still loved. I started to succeed. I started to become respected in my field. That made me so very proud. I was respected. I was validated. I had worth. I had the sort of income I longed for when I was poor and hungry. I could buy myself toys. People called me Mr. Broken Toys and meant it. I could take my wife out to my favorite restaurants. I could buy a car for each of us so I didn't have to drive her everywhere. She could drive herself. Alone. She started to get unhappy. The man that she loved so very much started spending more and more time away. Did he still love her? Yes. They had been literally hungry and lived week to week wondering if they would make the next one, but that was long ago. They had enough. They could finally be secure, safe and happy. But they weren't. He was never around. Because he was gone so long and his hours were so demanding, he insisted that she not work and have a career because it would be inconvenient for him too. Besides, she couldn't make nearly enough for it to be worth the hassle. She had to sit around alone with no job of her own, being handed an allowance like a child from someone who clearly didn't love her anymore. I was doing great. I missed my wife, but all of what I was doing was for us. She didn't even have to work. Work sucks. I felt so good that I was so successful that she didn't have to. But she wasn't happy. What the hell? I've worked my ass off and she isn't happy? It made no sense. I was happy. I had nice toys, the latest and greatest laptop, top of the line smartphone, a nice car. I give her all of those toys and more. She is even more unhappy. That ungrateful bitch. The cycle continued with each of us resenting the other more and more until everything that really mattered was gone. She is now on her own with a substantially lower income since she never had the chance to develop any marketable skills. As for me, I still have my oh so precious career. I now hate it. I hate it for the instrument of destruction it became, but I don't blame it. I know who to blame. I am disgusted with myself and the career that I paid far too much for. I would happily quit. The toys and comforts mean nothing. The wine tastes like ash and the filet might as well be a turd, so I stopped indulging myself. I eat rice and beans because it reminds myself of a much happier time when I had someone that loved and loved me back and had hope for better days. Still I go on. I wake up every fucking day, square my shoulders, and go do a job that I hate almost as much as I hate myself. But now, finally, I don't do it for me. Now I actually do it for her. She went back to college. She has a kick-ass degree and career plan. She loves it. She is so happy, actually happy. She made Chancellor's List. She has a job. It isn't highly paid, but she is doing well there and is valued and respected. She is doing so well and I am so proud of her and what she is accomplishing. She is able to focus on the future because I'm helping her with the present. I keep the wolf at her door fat and lazy. If she finds herself caught in the storm, I make it fucking rain. I keep at it because the woman who I abandoned and who I will love until the day that I die needs me. In a few short years she won't and I can finally rest. A very long time ago I was sitting on a broken down bed in a shithole of an apartment and my wife and I were eating pasta parmesan, a feast composed of spaghetti, that sawdust that some people call parmesan, and country crock margarine. The Winter Olympics were on and we were watching figure skating. It was fucking freezing and we were huddled under a pile of blankets. We had full bellies and my wife loved figure skating and we sat there watching that little television set that we were able to buy with some of my Desert Storm money with delight. It was the happiest moment of my life. I would give every single thing I own to go back and be there again. Have any sexy relatives? My mom died right when I was born. She was actually really hot and pretty, but that's not the point. I grew up with my dad's family, because my dad has all sorts of emotional issues, and he bailed before I was born. Growing up I felt like there was always a lot of distance between me and my sister. When I was about 17, I started to notice that my sister was a hottie. I don't want to go into too many details about it, but I accidentally found a video that she made of herself. I knew she didn't make it for me, but I thought she was so fucking beautiful that I watched it 5 times. I probably would have watched it a hell of a lot more, except that right around the time I found the video, all this crazy shit went down, and I had to leave home. My dad's family who I was staying with got in bad trouble with the law. I never talk about it. So I was totally lusting after my sister at that point. She was also having bad trouble with the law. She was actually in custody when I left home. My friend and I went to go pick her up. When I saw her that day, after seeing the video, I have to be honest, I just wanted to fuck her brains out. Looking back on it now, it's pretty messed up, but I think she had feelings for me too. She actually kissed me right after we came to get her. And it wasn't a sisterly kiss, you know? I mean, it wasn't like ridiculously sexual or anything, but it definitely wasn't sisterly. After we left, we all went to crash with my sister's friends. On the trip there, my friend sort of implied that he wanted to get with my sister, and I got a little jealous. He's a good-looking guy, and even though she was my sister, I just felt like he was a competition. Pretty much everyone in my life at that point was wanted by the government, so we all moved around a lot. I'm not saying that I'm proud of it or anything, but it was kind of an awesome time. My friend and my sister never hooked up, I don't think, but I thought there was some serious sexual tension going on between them. It was around that time that I got hurt really badly in an accident. It was fucked up, I almost died. But when I was in recovery, my sister came to see me, and out of the clear blue sky, she started to give me this awesome, slow, passionate kiss on the lips. Sadly, nothing ever came of it. We spent some time apart, and I started to get really religious, so I tried not to think of her that way. It was actually going well for a long time. I was totally over her. But I have to say, like a year or so after all that stuff went down, we were out sailing, not romantically, and she was wearing like the hottest bikini I've ever fucking seen, and it brought back all the old feelings. A little while later, she actually wound up with the sexual tension guy friend from before. I can't say I was surprised, but even after she was shaking up with my friend, there was one time we were at a party. My friend was inside, and my sister and I were outside alone. It was a really intimate moment. I think something might have happened, except that I killed the mood when I told her that Darth Vader was our father and that I had to go face him. Parents of disabled children, do you regret your child? My second cousin who is in his 60s have 4 daughters. Let's call the oldest Kay. Kay was born with very severe Down syndrome, diabetes, and celiac. The father is a retired surgeon, and the mother is a nurse. They raised 3 other daughters after Kay, one of which was diabetic as well and was also a problem child. They all ended up as decent adults, but not Kay. Doctors said that Kay had absolutely no chance of living past 5 years old. So the mom gave up her job at 24 when Kay was born. She expected to be back at work within 10 years, but in reality, she basically gave up her life when Kay was born, for 40 years. Kay is 43 this year and still requires full-time care. She works at a factory that is specifically for Down syndrome people. She has to have her blood tested several times a day, which means that one of her parents has to drive for 30 minutes to check it, then 45 minutes home. She is dropped off and picked up by her parents every day she works. They have to measure every meal she eats with a measuring jug to check to ensure she maintains a healthy diet and get up 3 times a night to check her blood, as is usual with Down syndrome patients. The older she has gotten, the more difficult she is to deal with. I sat with her mother one night drinking wine, talking to her about it. After a few glasses, she broke down. She never got a chance to live her own life because of Kay. Not in their wildest dreams did they expect her to live as long as she had. The mother is a wonderful, kind woman. I've never seen someone with so much love. But that night she had tears running down her face. She looked at me right in my eyes and said, "I wish she'd just die already." Pawn shop workers, what is your weirdest customer encounter? I am a store manager at one of the busiest pawn shops in Northern California. I'll share 6 of the most memorable ones. 1. One day, a dude walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own shit. He claims that it's magic, and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he is walking out, he drops the box on accident, gets all of his shit on the floor, sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of shit for a couple of seconds, and runs out of the shop. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. We would see the guy on the streets occasionally, and I don't think the guy ever got his shit together. 2. A guy brought in a stone painted green, claiming it was ancient gold and that after years it had developed a patina. I tried to explain to him that all gold is ancient gold made in something as intense as a dead star colliding, but he insisted it was gold. After about 30 minutes of discussion, he forced me to test it, and when I showed him it wasn't gold, he told me he spent $4,000 buying it from some guy. 3. Someone brought in a clump of bent and slightly melted forks and spoons, claiming it was a meteorite fallen from the International Space Station trash dump shot into space. 4. Someone brought in a costume cape claiming it was the real invisibility cloak from Harry Potter, like he genuinely didn't think it was a prop from the movie, and full-heartedly believed that it's the actual magical cape. He even tried to demonstrate it to me, and when I refused him again, he walked out, muttering, "Fucking muggles." 5. A couple used to come in once a week and pawn stuff. Well, one day, the wife decided she was done with him as a husband, snuck up behind him in the store, sprayed him in the face with pepper spray, stole his car keys and his wallet, ran out of the store, and stole his car. 6. Someone came in with an obviously recently used dialysis machine. It still had blood sprayed on it. It looked like they ripped it away while it was in use. They tried to sell it for thousands of dollars, and threatened to shoot up the place when we said no. We had to call the police on them. I hope whoever was supposed to be using the machine is alive and fine. I'm in a sexual relationship with my sister. It started when we were both horny teenagers at the time who were curious about sex. We had played doctor as kids numerous times, as most siblings do, and eventually, we started making out, so to speak. The first time it happened, we had been watching a movie in our room, and I tried to use my moves. We ended up kissing, and things slowly moved from there. We didn't immediately start having sex or anything. It was pretty gradual, like any other relationship is, especially as teens. My first experience with just physical contact, like kissing and touching, was pretty wild. There was definite shame involved. I felt scared of what God would do to us, but being a horny teenager, I managed to overlook it somehow. The first time we had sex was pretty special, but my feelings of guilt and shame were gone by then. It took us over 2 years to finally get to that point, and by then, it was hard to feel bad about our actions. We tried to hide it as best we could. We still share the same room because of how small the house is. There are only 2 bedrooms, one for our parents and one for us. The only one I think who might have some inkling of what was going on might have been our mother. She caught us wrestling once. We were clothed, thank God, but it was obvious what was going on. However, she never said anything and never made us move out of the room, so maybe not. At the least, I've never told anyone in real life, and probably never will. Pawn shop owners, what was the most valuable thing you have got? Some girls thought they had worthless cards that ended up being very worthwhile. I worked in a comic book shop that also sold trading cards for Magic: The Gathering. 2 young girls around 14 came in with a small box of cards. They said they found it in their uncle's closet that recently passed away, figured it was worthless, and just wanted to see its worth. I opened up the box of cards to take a quick glance and was a little alarmed at what I saw: Alpha and Beta cards, a couple of Power 9 cards, and this was just the first 10 cards in. I stopped, and said, "I'm really sorry, I'm not familiar with these older cards." I lied, I just wasn't authorized to try to buy something of this magnitude. I'll need to call the store owner. I called him, and at first, he was annoyed because the other store he was visiting had a Ford plow through the front window. He just said not to bother with a trade-in, until I casually mentioned some of the cards there in the stack. He said, "Don't let those cards leave the building." I'm on my way, and hung up. The girls couldn't wait, and I asked if they wouldn't mind leaving the cards with me, along with their names and phone numbers, so we could get back to them. When the owner came in, he went to the back, got some gloves, and went through all the cards. I stayed after my shift because I just wanted to see it unfold. The owner gained like 10,000 respect points from me when the girls and an older woman, presumably somebody's mother, came back in, as he was straight with them. He said, "What you have here is all very worthwhile. There isn't a card in this box that would sell for less than about $5. But these cards here," he fanned out some cards that I couldn't see, "are the most valuable in the box. And this one," B pulled a card away, "would sell for the price of these, and the entire box, at least twice as much. I do not have enough money available to make you a fair offer. What you have here is easily worth about $20,000 to a collector." The girls' mouths dropped open. The owner offered them all the cash he had available in the shop, about $6,000. They accepted. More experience cards are all in very good collectors' hands, and I hope the uncle is happy seeing this from above. My aunt dated a murderer. I was 13 years old and I was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had had problems with their 2 daughters as adults, and they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure that I didn't turn out the same way. A do-over if you will, so they were very strict. My aunt had her life together at that time, and we hang out a lot. She made sure that the time we spent together was always super cool. I would stay over Saturday nights. We would go out and hang out at the pier and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend. My grandparents had no idea of any of these activities, of course. One night when we were out having fun, my aunt meets this guy and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by Junior and was a kind and charming talker. They exchanged numbers and ended up spending the night. They went on a few dates and my aunt really liked Junior. He took her to his home and introduced her to his father, and showed her around his land. He lived out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I was only there once when he was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. Everyone has their quirks. About 2 weeks later, we were at the pier and he is talking about how he had these painkillers, and offered me some to take home. I declined of course and told him I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asks me if he can see for himself, assuring me he won't really hurt me and he's just trying to have fun. This bastard twists my arm behind my back until I hear a pop. I start to cry, and he laughs and says, "Aw sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance." I'm sorry, no need to ruin the good time we are all having. I cried and went to my granddad in the pier office. My aunt comes in and lets me know that she thinks it's fucked up too, and that she talked to him about it. She goes back outside, and he asks her what she is up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I am staying over because of what had just happened. I was whining about going home. I was pissed that she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me. He told her that she should meet him under the Sunset Bridge at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He said that the stars are beautiful and you can listen and hear the fish. He tells her he would love to see it with her, and they can dance under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and lived in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times were pretty normal. She tells him maybe, and we leave. I decide to spend the night with her so I can see my boyfriend Charlie. She calls him when she gets home and says that she can come but she will have me with her. He groans and is like, fine, alright, I guess she can come too, maybe she will get tired and sleep in the car. She sits down with me, hugs me, and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what had happened with my arm. She then calls him again and tells him that she is picking up Charlie, and me and Charlie can hang out, and they can have their time. He goes into a rage and starts sputtering and cussing about how it's too complicated now and he just wanted an intimate meeting with her, not a damn family reunion. He went on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old kid and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He hangs up after calling her a crazy bitch and a lot of cursing. She bewilderingly hangs up the phone. We go about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation and things are fine. He calls her a few more times, but my aunt was having none of it. The whole affair lasted only a month. Junior was soon forgotten and we went about our business. Flash forward 2 years later, I am almost out of middle school. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents. One day my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school and called our good high school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home. We were smoking cigarettes and laughing listening to the radio. We cruised down the road a bit before heading back. She dropped me off first. In my head at the time, Darla and her red truck were older, cooler, and everything I wanted to be. That was the last time we ever saw her. She didn't show up for work and school for 5 days. Everyone assumed she just had run away because her parents were going through a nasty divorce. Her truck was gone too. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks about her when at about 9 at night my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Darla's body was found out in the woods wearing a flamenco dress. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled to death, and just left out there in the wood getting eaten by the animals. I was devastated, saddened, and horrified. She was so young, only 16. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is they caught the guy that had done it. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend who had been missing for about 8 years and also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. Clear as day on the screen staring back at me was a picture of Junior. I had no idea they even knew each other. He confessed that he killed her in the woods behind his house, and I recognized when they showed the place in the news, it is exactly where he taught my aunt how to shoot guns. I can't even imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night. My aunt lived on to make awesome new memories with me. I have a beautiful life with my husband and 3 boys that most likely wouldn't have happened if things had gone differently that night. What is your worst roommate horror story? Freshman year in college is always the hardest, especially if you have a shit roommate. My first roommate came from a party family, and I guess she wanted to continue the tradition at school. I would wake up to her fucking random dudes or loudly masturbating while drunk. The masturbating part isn't the problem as much, but she would always throw up when she orgasmed. That's not even the worst part. The worst part was that she cared about her fellow partygoers. Every night when she went out, she would get smashed, but would somehow always find people worse off than her. If they couldn't find their home or communicate, she'd drop them back at our tiny dorm room and go back to parties for another few hours. Usually, she doesn't come back at all. The even worse part was that her bed was lofted with a ladder, and my bed wasn't. So almost every night, I'd wake up to drunk people trying to get into bed with me with my roommate nowhere to be seen. I would have to get up and put them to sleep elsewhere. The worst time it ever was when she dropped off a frat pledge who had quadrupled what he could handle and had dropped some Molly too. He was all over the place, drunk, throwing up, hallucinating. I genuinely thought he was going to choke on his vomit and die, and I was afraid to leave him to sleep. All night was spent carrying this guy back and forth to the girls' only communal restroom so he could try to sober up. My roommate didn't come back that night. He was pretty fucked up well into the next day. Eventually, he was good to go home, and I walked him to his dorm across campus. When I returned home, there was my roommate in my bed, furiously drunk, masturbating, and throwing up while doing so. Fuck you, Carol. Shop owners, what was the most illegal thing a customer had brought to your shop? A friend of mine owns a rather unique store. He sells a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing, and similar. One day while I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a bag full of Nazi memorabilia. It had a few Schutzstaffel, SS, daggers, belts, flags, and other Nazi memorabilia. They said they found it in their grandpa's attic and wanted to see how much they were worth. Their logic seemed solid, except for one thing. We are in Germany. Here the state kind of frowns upon owning or selling this kind of stuff. And what's even worse is that my friend is Jewish. He doesn't look too typical though. He was fuming, clenching his fists under the counter, but somehow kept his composure and asked them to leave. I told them they could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it was not their fault they found it. But they figured that if Grandpa was a Nazi, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was insulted by the idea that just because he owned a medieval store and sold historic weapons, he must know a Nazi collector that would pay cash. He told them to get out and donate it, or if they insist on selling it, to ship it to the US. More money from history buffs. Right before they left, he told them that he was Jewish, and for them to never come to his store again. The shocked, terrified, sorry, and guilty look was such gold. They apologized profusely and hurried the way out. I suspect they sold it to the US, and there's probably one happy little Nazi nerd with a new happy stabby toy. College resident assistants, what's the most memorable event you've had in your dorm? I was an RA for 2 years, and it was the best and most hilarious 2 years of my life. I used to catch people playing possums all the time. Basically, a bunch of students would climb a tree and drink until they started falling out. The last person in the tree wins. A few people broke their arms from doing that. I once found a couple of idiots having lightsaber fights once. They'd unscrewed the fluorescent light tubes from the common room, and were having sword fights with them. One time a whole floor got scabies and were running back and forth from the laundry room washing every single item of clothing and linen they had. One resident was hiding a homeless person in the TV room. Residents were welcome to have friends on site, and they were also welcome to stay in the TV room and the rec center after lockup. They just had to pull the door closed after themselves when they left. This guy was staying in the TV room with his homeless friend until the RAs finished their rounds, lock his homeless friend in the TV room, went back and slept in his own room, and then woke up early to go back to the TV room before the RAs came around in the morning. This went on for a week. Once I woke up around midnight because people were firing Roman candle fireworks at one of the buildings. We were having problems with some local kids who kept playing pranks on the residents, and naturally, I assumed it was the local kids. So I called campus security to deal with it, and they ended up rounding up my own residents. After I gave them all write-ups, one of them complained that the rule book didn't say that they weren't allowed to set fireworks aimed at the buildings. The RAs from one of the other residences on campus came to us with one of their problems. They kept finding human feces outside one of their buildings and assumed it was one of our residents playing pranks on them. I told him that I would keep an ear out. When it kept happening, one of their RAs had a stake out and saw the feces being dropped out of one of the windows. It turns out this resident was setting toilet paper down on his bedroom floor, shitting on it, and dropping it out the window because he didn't want to use the hall's bathrooms. On the final night in the halls, after finals were done, I found a room of 10 people, each pouring a beer directly into the carpet for their friends who were leaving that year. But my boyfriend got home from work. It wasn't my boyfriend. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year we'd gotten in a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So, this afternoon I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. Around 1 p.m. I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight "hey how's it going" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed and I had earplugs half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward "we've been fighting for 24 hours" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it. Without entering the room, I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. That was not my boyfriend. Someone else was in my house. Then I thought, could that have been his mom? His sister? The landlady? For some reason I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized, his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might come over unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move, I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird, though. Nothing was missing from the apartment despite us keeping a jar full of money right at the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. She also didn't have red nails. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart, looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment but doesn't touch or take anything valuable, takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves. I'm curious, but I hope I never find out what happened. Was someone's nightmare car thief and almost died. When I was in high school, my friend Ivory asked me to come to her birthday party. The first leg of the evening was at a restaurant I'd never been to a few towns over. Afterward, we would all return to a mutual friend's house for beverages and relaxation. One of Ivory's friends had volunteered to drive us all to the restaurant, but I'd heard plenty of stories about her terrible driving. As a result, I opted to drive myself. Ivory's friend told me 7 p.m., so at 7 p.m. my black ass rolled into the parking lot in my minivan. I called Ivory to let her know I had arrived, but turns out they were leaving at 7, not arriving at 7. This meant I had about a half hour of boredom before I'd have company. Being the introvert I am, I decided not to go inside and wait like a normal person. Instead, I decided to sit in the car and listen to music. Moreover, I also didn't park right near the restaurant. The restaurant was located in a plaza, a strip with several other stores along either side. For some reason, I thought it'd be weird for patrons to see me just sitting there like some waiting weirdo. Instead, I parked at the far end of the plaza by a supermarket. I could still see the restaurant, and there were fewer cars on this side of the parking lot. 5 minutes goes by, and I'm rapidly switching through songs. 10 minutes goes by, I'm bored like a piece of pine in a woodshop class. Out of the abyssal silence of boredom, a text came through. Ivory had texted me, "Thank God, a brief reprieve from this boredom." As I'm smiling and composing a response, I get this weird feeling. You know that feeling like someone is watching you? Like you can almost feel their eyes on you? I felt something unnerving. So I looked up from the glow of my phone into the darkness before me. What I saw was a family of 4. There was a woman, her husband, and their 2 children. All 4 were looking at me intensely. The woman was standing in front of her 2 children with her hands outstretched as though to shield them from a proleptic and palpable existential danger. The look in her eyes was of sheer horror. I have never seen such utter panic so visible on someone's face. The woman slowly crept forward, family inching behind her. She began moving toward the driver's side, closer to me with each step, and with each step, her terror rising. At this point, I'm beginning to panic because I have no clue why this woman and her family are snarling at me so aggressively. Without warning, the husband pulled out a handgun and pointed it at me. My blood froze. Is today the day where I die to a family of ultra-racist white supremacists? I literally saw my life flash before my eyes. I put my hand up and yelled at them not to shoot and that I was opening the door. As soon as I opened the door, the dad put the gun down and pointed to my left. His wife, children, and I all simultaneously follow his hand. He was pointing 5 spots to the left of my car where an exactly identical car sat. The mother threw her head back in a single burst of dry laughter as she unlocked her car. What happened was, this family left the grocery store to find a black teen dressed in all black sitting in their car, with a sinister smile on his face. They apologized profusely for the next 5 minutes and even offered to give me money or pay for my meal. I declined, as I am just glad I am alive. I still have cold sweats thinking about that day. Fucked up by making my dad punch a stripper in GTA and tearfully ask God for forgiveness in front of my entire family. When I was young, my brothers and I snuck a copy of San Andreas into the house. We spent days holed up in our basement taking turns playing, and down there my parents didn't bother us too much. In order to get tons of money for guns, we would go to the strip club and stand on the stage, absorbing the money dudes threw at the women and just let the game sit for 20 minutes. We had to be careful though, because sometimes the strippers would do a move and bump into our character CJ and the bouncers would shoot the place up. One day while I was playing, my mom yelled down to the basement at us to get ready, we're going to Pizza Hut. In a stroke of genius, I drove to the GTA strip club, got on the stage, and then turned the TV off, and we left. It was to be the heist of the century. My dad, however, was at church at this time, practicing for a gospel concert he was singing in. He always filmed the practices so he could take notes at home upon playback, and this time was no different. While my mom and brothers, and I were still at Pizza Hut, he arrived home and plugged his camcorder into the VCR. We had just one VCR, and it was connected to the basement TV. Back at Pizza Hut, my mom gets a phone call. She puts her napkin down and slowly looks around the table at us and says okay a few times into the phone in this really calculating, specific way that she always did when we were in trouble. Naturally, it was at this point that we knew we were in trouble. We had no idea what for though. After a very quiet minivan ride, we get home and my mom says, boys, why don't we go down to the basement? Your dad wants to show you his gospel practice downstairs. It was then at this point we knew why we were in trouble. So we drag our feet down the stairs, and lo and behold, my dad is sitting on the couch, TV on, a stripper's polygonal breast swung stiffly back and forth on screen to En Vogue's My Lovin', with CJ standing mere inches away, collecting money. My dad starts in, boys, I don't even know where to begin. This PlayStation was a blessing to you for Christmas, and this is how you repay us? By breaking our trust? He is holding the controller up now, gesticulating with it. Here I am, practicing to bring glory to God, but he was cut off, as he inadvertently squeezed the controller, causing CJ to punch the stripper. My entire family stands in silence, watching together as the bouncers in the strip club shoot the place up for what seems like an eternity. After the shooting stops, and CJ appears in front of the hospital, I look back and see my mom silently weeping into her hand. I look at my dad as a single tear rolls down his cheek, and he prays under his breath. After another eternity of silence, without a word, my dad bends down, disconnects the PlayStation, walks back to the family computer, disconnects it, goes to his car, and drives away. For the next 4 months, he kept the PS2 and PC locked in his office at work. It eventually became a funny memory, especially for me and my brothers. It's one of my favorite memories of growing up. I miss my brothers, they're both gone now. Today I fucked up by thinking divorce was an April Fool's gag. On April 1st, I got a group text from my wife Sarah's side of the family stating there was an emergency family meeting happening that night over dinner at my mother-in-law's house. I immediately had April Fool's spidey senses starting to tingle. I was excited to see what prank they had planned out, and we hadn't all got together since Christmas, so I said my wife and I were in. We were the last to arrive, and it was pretty somber when we walked in. We all sat down at the table, and my wife's brother Tim informed the family that his wife Ashley had been having an affair and they were divorcing. The affair was with a longtime close family friend Chris who lived a block away. Chris's wife Jen had caught them when she came home early one day last week and broke the news to Tim. Both families have been friends for years. They live less than a block from each other. They each have been married for more than 15 years, and each have 2 kids right around the same age. Honestly, I have always thought both of them were picture-perfect families. All 4 of them and their kids were at our house 2 weeks ago for a barbecue. After airing a lot of dirty laundry, their plans to divorce, how it could affect future family functions. Tim opened it up to the group with any questions, comments, and concerns. There was only silence. I broke the silence with laughter and a slow clap, saying this was the best April Fool's gag I've ever seen, but I wasn't falling for it. I told Ashley and especially Tim they needed to consider going into acting. Their performances were top-notch, and their tears seemed genuine. It was honestly Oscar-worthy. Looking back in hindsight, this was not the best thing to say, especially for only being a part of the family for 6 months. I probably should not have said anything. Everyone in the room looked horrified. My mother-in-law, who had been crying the entire time, lost all composure. She left the room in hysterics and did not return before we left. Tim just shook his head, and his cheating wife actually let out a brief chuckle before calling me out for being a dumbass for thinking this was a ruse, then berating me for being so insensitive. The rest of the family sat in silence, shaking their heads as my wife berated me for trying to make a joke out of a serious situation. Turns out their family never does any gag or prank for April Fools, like never ever. I wouldn't have known this since I was only in the family for 6 months and never spent an April with them yet. Should have just stayed silent. I barely talked for the rest of night besides apologizing. Everything was really awkward and my wife dragged me to leave the scene. I'm such a dumbass. My wife told me I needed to send a text to apologize again through text and I have no clue what to say. Help me out in the comments. City wanted me to take better care of my gardens, so I had them approved by the local Nature Conservation Association. My house is surrounded by 2 gardens, one in the front, facing the street, and one in the back, bordering my neighbor's gardens. When my parents and grandparents moved into our house 26 years ago, they planted a thick hedge around the entire property. They also installed a rose arch over the pathway to our front door and my grandfather was always busy keeping up the garden, planting, weeding, and keeping everything very tidy. It was his pride and joy. My grandfather died in 2002, and after that, the garden was neglected for a few years as my parents were still working and my brother and I were in school. But then, in 2005, my mom read something that we should plant stuff to help the bees and she took over the gardens, planting lilac, rhododendron, roses, and various berries. Later we decided to also install raised garden beds with various kitchen herbs. The garden got revived and is now my mom's baby. My mom is now over 70 years old and has officially given the house over to my brother and me, so that we know what to do when she dies. Since then, I've been sporadically taking care of the gardens. I like them in their wild shape with all the birds, bees, bumblebees, and butterflies flying around. In autumn we get hedgehogs and we've been visited by a family of foxes recently. Then, recently, we received a letter from the city stating that our garden was interfering with the safety of the street, because the hedge was overgrowing the pavement and contained poisonous berries which were a danger to children. Now, my brother trims the hedge every month to make sure nothing is overgrowing the pavement in any way, and while the berries are poisonous, to get to them you'd have to be quite resilient because they're surrounded by thorns in our fence. They are also known to be ideal food for some local birds, so I contacted our local Nature Conservation Association and asked if they would like to have a look at our gardens and maybe tell us if we could improve anything to make them even more nature-friendly. They came, looked around, and then told us they rarely see gardens so in touch with nature. They approved our gardens as especially nature-friendly and contacted the city to tell them that from their point of view, any changes would be considered unfriendly to nature, and since our city prides itself on once being one of the green capitals in our country, they had to budge. Don't mess with my gardens. Found 3 teeth under my son's pillow. My son Jack is 6, and he just started losing his baby teeth. One of our family traditions was the tooth fairy routine. Every time Jack lost a tooth, he would tuck it under his pillow at night, and by morning, he would find $5 in its place, left by the tooth fairy. One evening, I went into Jack's room to play my part in the tooth fairy tradition. To my surprise, instead of 1 tiny tooth, I found 3. I blinked at the trio of enamel pieces. It seemed really odd, but I was interested in the event, and left $15 under his pillow. 2 weeks passed without any tooth sightings. I began to think that the triple tooth event was just a one-off. Maybe he collected his teeth so he could get more money in one go. However, one night I went in, and discovered another 3 teeth under his pillow. Alarm bells started to ring in my mind. I knew children lost their baby teeth, but 6 in such a short span seemed a bit excessive. Despite my unease, I left $20 under his pillow, maintaining the magic of the tooth fairy. The next day, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked Jack about his sudden loss of teeth. His answer left me stunned. Emily and Lucas's tooth fairy only gives them $1, he declared. Mine gives me $5. So I collect their teeth too and give them their money when the tooth fairy gives me the money. I chuckled at the resourcefulness of my son, but it did make sense. Jack had always had a knack for making the best out of any situation, especially since Emily and Lucas were his best friends. At their next playdate, I recounted Jack's business strategy to their parents. Their faces mirrored my initial reaction, shock, followed by laughter. It was indeed a bizarre situation, but none of us could deny the humor and cleverness behind it. Instead of being upset, they decided to play along. Each parent handed me $40, asking me to distribute it among their kids in case they contributed to Jack's tooth collection again. I accepted, not quite believing that I had somehow become an accomplice to my son's tooth fairy scheme. I really hope he doesn't involve more kids in this. It would be kinda terrifying to see 10 teeth under his pillow. Think my doctor boyfriend has been drugging me to make me forget things. I have been having gaps in my memory. Every time I told my boyfriend, who's a doctor, I have been explained away as being tired, overworked, or whatever else. I paid more attention to when these memory losses occur, and I noticed that it only happens when I go on dates with him. I know it must be crazy, but I have woken up with dried semen on my breast several times with no memory of the night before. I know it's him as he likes that kind of thing. The first time it happened was when we were drinking, and I wrote it off as I was drunk and blacked out. We get drunk and have sex all the time, so it's not a big deal to me. But then there were a few times when I knew I was 100% sober. I decided to break up with him over it, only to suddenly find myself on a date with him a few days later. I remember being at the restaurant, but nothing before that. My car and his car were in the parking lot, too, so I was confused. I decided to play along when he asked me to come back to his place. After 3 days at his place, I started to trust him again. I was going to ask him about my issues and confront him, when he randomly pointed to these red bumps on my thigh and said I should be treating those sores. I had completely forgotten they were there. These little red bumps looked like needle injections that got infected. I got so freaked out he mentioned them that I decided to leave. The next day he came over to check on me, and then I lost my memory after that. The next thing I knew, I woke up in bed with more dried semen on my chest. Then today, he met me for lunch, saying we had agreed to meet. I never agreed to be with him and would never want to. He does this all the time, saying we agreed to do something I have no memory of. I am sick and tired of it and want him punished. This has started to affect my work life as well, as I start to get paranoid when I see a boss walk into a room after making eye contact with me. I get paranoid that they are about to fire me. My friends also state I have been acting strangely and out of character. I have even begun to lose sleep and sleepwalk too. Is there a way to have blood work done to see what kind of drug he is using on me? I do not want the police to blow me off and push me away as some crazy lady, so I want to have concrete evidence when I go to the police. Crazy lady assaults autistic kid. I work at Lowe's. I was working in the lawn and garden section. I was watching this 15-year-old boy sorting and moving potted flowers around, putting them in a very specific order, matching colors, size of pots, and height of the flowers themselves. He does it every time he comes, and he does an amazing job. He is in his own word and bothering no one, and some folks also notice him doing a bang-up job. But this one old crone of a woman stood behind this young man, arms folded and tapping her foot. At first I was thinking maybe she was his mom or they were shopping together, but the next thing she did proved me wrong. She clears her throat in that dreaded fashion we all know, and examined very loudly, ahem. Excuse me, you need to help me. The young man pays her no mind, continuing with his task. He didn't even blink. She doesn't like this. She clears her voice and replies louder. You are not listening to me, you are going to help me now. Before I can walk to her and take over, she reaches out and grabs this young man by the right arm just above his elbow very harshly. The sudden and hard action of this caused him to spin around and jerk his arm away from this lady, and the sudden movement startled the old woman. She stumbled backward and lost her balance, ultimately falling on her butt. By the time I reached the young man to see if he was okay, his mother had shown up and was asking what had happened. The woman was up and berating this young man, saying he attacked her and she will have him fired and arrested. The young man was crying and his mother was shocked. I told the mom to take her son and calm him down, that he had done nothing wrong, and just make sure he was okay. The crazy old woman didn't like that I took his side. She began to lie and tell me she was the victim and she didn't do anything, that the employee attacked her. I told her not so kindly that she was a liar, and I had witnessed the whole incident. I told her that the young man she forcibly grabbed does not work here and that she had assaulted him. A crowd has gathered at this point, and the crazy woman has noticed that no one believes her side of the story. She just puts her head down and walks quickly out the store. The young man walks over to me, pats my shoulder once and goes back to the flowers. The mom told me that was the equivalent of a high five from him. Brought back memories of their dead son. I was thrown a laptop by an angry executive early this morning, with him complaining that his laptop had locked up again. Normally we have a ticketing system in place for any and all tech issues. However, when an executive wants something, he bypasses the system because of rank privileges. So I go through the normal routine of diagnosis, and through my efforts, I see that the issue is simply bad RAM. I replaced the RAM and took the unit back to the executive. He tells me he refuses to take the unit unless I have made 100% sure that everything that was wrong with it is fixed. Internally I wanted to punch this man, but I held it in and simply asked him what other issues he was having and pulled out a notepad. He ran through a load of issues that just needed a cleaner, so I took his unit back to my desk. After deleting bullshit programs and cleaning out junk data, I found that a folder in his roaming was reading 12 gigabytes but was hidden. I log in with my creds and enable viewing hidden or protected files, and I see that the hidden folder was from 2014. It was just a bunch of pictures and looked to be a temp folder created by a picture manager software I deleted. When we see personal pictures on the machine, we are supposed to delete them immediately. No one ever actually does this, as we are not that big of dicks in the IT department. So I decided to just move the pictures to his desktop under a folder I created called Old Pics. I took the laptop to him and informed him of the pictures. He thanked me for my time, and I went back to work. About an hour later, he and his wife, who had come up to join him for lunch, came over to my desk. He seemed very happy, and she was crying. Normally when I have nothing to do and a boss comes over, I stand up to greet them. Just the way I was raised, I guess. I was not prepared for what followed and was totally shocked by the outcome. The lady wanted to thank me for finding the pictures, and the executive reached out to shake my hand, thanking me profusely before pulling me into a hug in front of the entire IT department. I awkwardly hugged him back, and he let me go, embarrassed. My eyes are wide, flabbergasted, and totally unprepared for this, extremely, out of character moment from this guy. barely able to hold back the tears. His wife tells me that the pictures I recovered were thought to be lost. In 2012 their 4-year-old son died of leukemia, and the pictures I recovered were taken right before his diagnosis when he was 3. Because of a house fire a few years ago, they thought they had lost every last photo of their son. Apparently, those were the photos I had recovered. Today was actually his son's death anniversary, hence why the executive was in a terrible mood. His wife reached out to hug me, and everyone in the IT department stared at their screens hard with puffy eyes, as we were all not expecting this kind of emotional event today. My boss came out of his office to thank me personally and forwarded an email chain to me ahead of a company-wide email that the CEO sent out, basically retelling the tale while naming me personally. He threw in words about striving for excellence and the unexpected results of everyday excellence. My boss told me to take the day off early since the flood of messages was making it hard to do my job. Today I saw the man that saved me when I was being raped. When I was 13 years old I was raped behind a church next to the middle school I attended. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a sunny day in the spring, right before school was out for the summer. I had a couple friends I hung out with and they persuaded me to skip class with them. As we were leaving the campus, security yelled at us to stop and everyone started running in different directions. I ended up behind the church, alone. As I was catching my breath a man came around the corner. He was much bigger than I was at 13 years old. I was immediately scared and knew something bad was going to happen. He came up to me and said I was the snack he had been looking for. I tried to run, but he grabbed me and pinned me against the wall. I had no chance of escaping him. He was such a big guy. I only remember around 3 minutes of the assault. I was exhausted from trying to fight off this man and trying to scream while he was crushing my body with his. I don't remember if I passed out, or if my brain has been trying to block out the trauma, but all I remember happening next is another man jumping on my attacker and just beating the shit out of him. I didn't see him coming. I was naked, crying, dirty, I didn't know what to do. The man who saved me ended up knocking out my attacker. He gave me a blanket and comforted me as best he could until the police arrived. The next couple years of my life were just a blur of depression. The man was arrested, my family moved us away from the area and we never told anyone besides my immediate family. It has been 8 years since this happened. Today I went to McDonald's near the neighborhood I grew up in and saw the man who saved me that day. I went through the drive-thru and he handed me my food. At first, I thought he looked familiar but couldn't tell where I knew him from. He smiled at me and said, "You don't remember me, huh?" I laughed awkwardly and said, "Remind me." All he said was the name of that church and every single memory that I had been trying so hard to forget came flooding back. I looked at him again and started sobbing. It was such an insane situation. I was sobbing in the McDonald's drive-thru. I was partly crying because of all the memories, but mostly because this man saved me and I didn't even remember him. He came out, we sat 6 feet apart, and we talked for almost an hour, just about life. He told me that his fiancée is pregnant with their first baby and they're expecting a baby girl. He's doing well. I've thought about him through the years and have always wondered where he was, how he was. Today I finally got my peace. I can sleep well tonight. I know my wife is in love with another man. And that's okay. Dear wife, I first met you when I was 19. I'm 34 now, but I still remember the moment I laid eyes on you. You know how people say, it was love at first sight? Well, I used to think it was a stupid overused cliche, but it happened to me that night. You were a Renaissance painting come to life, with your emerald green eyes, smooth, opal-like skin, and wavy blue-black hair. Your voice was like bells pealing. Your smile, radiant and glowing. I was your first kiss. I was your first boyfriend, your first love, your first everything. We dated for 2 years before you broke up with me for the first time, over some silly argument I don't even remember. We were split for a year, and then you came back into my life. We dated for nearly 3 years this time around before you broke up with me again when I was 25. You were scared by how fast our relationship was moving and wanted to be free. So I let you be free, but God, how it hurt me. We were practically engaged by that time. I was sketching out designs for a ring. I dated other women, but none of them were like you. You also dated other people, some good men, some mediocre, and some really bad. You cried in my arms after one of your boyfriends had yelled at you and left bruises on your cheeks. But one day, less than 2 years after we had last broken up, you told me you were engaged. I went to your wedding. You looked like a queen, every bit as beautiful as the day I first met you. How your face lit up as you saw your soon-to-be husband. I always thought that when I attended your wedding, I would be the groom. Wedded bliss didn't last long for you. After just a few months of marriage, your husband passed in a tragic accident. You miscarried your child. This sent you spiraling into a whirlwind of depression, anxiety, and opioid addiction. Yet I stood by you. I watched as you buried your husband and your unborn child. I watched as you collapsed onto the ground, watering the fresh earth with your tears. Some years later, we reconnected. You were recovered now, and more like the girl you once were. Your laughs were fewer and far in between, but they were still there. Your once youthful and innocent eyes were harder now, more weary, tired. But despite all this, despite everything, I still loved you. And deep down, you loved me too. For the second time before you turned 30, you were married. To me, this time. Sometimes, it hardly feels real. I wake up in the middle of the night and hear you breathing beside me, and a wave of pure joy washes over me when I realize that it's you. Still, I know that I don't have your heart completely. I know your heart is fragmented, and a piece of it is buried in a small graveyard by the sea. Your name is written on that tombstone as well, with your year of birth and a foreboding blank space after the hyphen. Some nights you wake up crying, and you will not tell me why, but I know why. Sometimes I know that when I wrap my arms around you, You close your eyes and pretend that it's him. I know that, and it's alright. I love you, and that's all that matters, so long as you love me too. Love is an infinite resource, and your love for him cannot deplete your love for me. I know that.